Bilkobaya Ab Main Benaheading Kalik Rahahun in a chilling case that remained unsolved for nearly 4 decades. A man was finally convicted for taking the lives of 2 young women in California, only to disturb his own sentencing by singing in front of the victims' grieving families. Back in 1986, 18-year-old Michelle Xavier and 20-year-old Jennifer Dewey attended a birthday dinner together. Hours later, their naked, lifeless bodies were discovered by a motorcyclist along Mill Creek Road in Fremont, California. Both had been shot and stabbed. Despite thousands of leads and tips, the investigation went cold for more than 30 years. It wasn't until a persistent detective uncovered David Mish's DNA beneath Jennifer's fingernails that the case found new momentum. At the time of the murders, Mish was a drug addict with a criminal history of burglary in the Fremont area. His troubled past included an abusive, alcoholic father, which led him to abandon school and spend his youth on the streets in 1990. Mish was convicted for murdering 36-year-old Margaret Narthisa Ball and sentenced to life imprisonment. He was also tied to the disappearance of 9-year-old Michaela Joy Garrick, who was abducted from a Hayward parking lot in 1988 and never seen again. In 2020, Mish faced charges in Michaela's case. During his trial for Michelle and Jennifer's murders, Mish falsely claimed he witnessed their abduction and tried to intervene, attempting to explain the presence of his DNA. However, his lies and the physical evidence, including a partial license plate number written on one victim's hand, which matched a vehicle linked to Mish, ultimately led to his conviction. On December 19, 2024, a jury found Mish guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder at his sentencing hearing on January 21, 2025. As family members read their victim impact statements, Mish disrupted the proceedings by singing in the courtroom, forcing deputies to remove him. Prosecutors condemned his actions as a shameless display of disrespect and lack of remorse. Chief Assistant District Attorney Royal Roberts praised the prosecution team's work on this complex case, acknowledging the long-awaited justice for the victims' families. Now 63 years old, Mish will serve 2 consecutive sentences of 25 years to life after completing his current 18 to life sentence. The case remained unsolved for many years as investigators struggled to identify the person behind the threatening letters and phone calls. 13 years after the crime, in 2003, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation was able to create a DNA profile and enter it into a national database, but no matches were found. Another 15 years passed before new advancements in DNA analysis in 2018 allowed for a fresh examination. By 2020, an investigator with expertise in DNA genealogy identified potential family members of the suspect. The family had 2 sons, who became the focus of the investigation. After waiting for decades for the case to be solved, DJ, Roger Dean's wife, could no longer endure the emotional toll and took her own life in 2020, just 7 months before a breakthrough would finally link the suspect to the crime scene. With new DNA technology, detectives were able to connect the DNA found on the ski mask and backpack to one of the brothers, Michael Chanel Jefferson. Law enforcement began monitoring him closely. While Jefferson was on a Spirit Airlines flight from Los Angeles to New Orleans, 2 deputies secretly accompanied him. During the flight, they observed him drinking from a plastic water bottle, which he later handed to a flight attendant for disposal. The detectives retrieved the discarded bottle without his knowledge, and DNA testing confirmed that his DNA matched the evidence from the 1985 crime scene. An investigator on board the flight also compared Jefferson's voice to the recordings from the threatening phone calls made in 1990 and found them strikingly similar. Jefferson was arrested on March 23, 2021, and extradited to Colorado. On August 6, 2024, at the age of 67, he pleaded guilty in a plea deal. On January 16, 2025, he was sentenced to 32 years in prison, receiving credit for the 3 years he had already served. Despite receiving the maximum sentence, Douglas County's district attorney noted that Jefferson could become eligible for parole in as little as 8 years. Tamara Dean Harney, Roger Dean's daughter, expressed frustration that Jefferson never showed any remorse or accountability. She explained how she had watched him closely during years of court hearings, always seeing the same emotionless expression. She wished he had at least offered an explanation or apology, which could have provided some closure. Tamara remarked that the delays, combined with a recent scandal involving manipulated DNA evidence within the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, made her feel relieved that her mother did not live to witness this drawn-out process. The plea bargain was largely influenced by concerns over former forensic scientist Yvonne Missy Woods, who had manipulated DNA evidence in other cases. Although Jefferson's DNA match was later confirmed by an independent lab, prosecutors feared the risk of proceeding to trial. Investigators believe Jefferson may have been motivated by his relationship with a woman who worked for Roger Dean, assuming Roger was wealthy and could be extorted for money. In court, Tamara expressed that she never gave up hope for justice, though the journey had deeply affected her. She explained how Jefferson not only ended her father's life but continued to torment her by making her question her safety and trust in others for many years. Another decades-old case Former Florida Sheriff's Deputy John Greer was identified as a suspect in a crime from 1979, around 2 a.m. on November 5th of that year. Greer radioed dispatch claiming he discovered a murder at the farm store in Ridge Harbor, Florida. The victim, 25-year-old assistant manager Adele Marie Easterly, had been shot in the back and head with a 12-gauge shotgun. The perpetrator reportedly escaped with only $7.34 from the store. Some deputies suspected Greer but lacked evidence to tie him to the crime. Just a few months earlier, on August 27, 1979, Greer had reported that his wife Jackie shot herself at their home in Port Charlotte. He claimed to have awakened to the sound of a gunshot, saw smoke coming from a closet, and found his wife's body inside. Although investigators were suspicious, they could not find enough evidence to charge him. About a year later, on October 3, 1980, Greer resigned from the sheriff's office just 4 days after a female friend of his was found dead inside her Ford Mustang in a wooded area. She had been missing for 9 days. Empty pill bottles and a note suggested suicide. But her husband reported that Greer had been stalking her and tried to pursue a relationship with her. Investigators followed many leads, including one where a friend of Adele claimed Adele was having an affair with a married deputy who described his wife's death as an accident after a heated argument. The case eventually went cold. Greer continued to work for various law enforcement agencies in Florida and also held multiple aviation positions. In 2016, the Cold Case Unit issued a statement indicating that a law enforcement officer was likely were involved, hoping to prompt new witnesses to come forward. Eventually, a former sheriff's office explorer contacted investigators, revealing that Greer had assaulted her and spoken about killing Adele. She also stated that she saw blood on his bare hand the night Adele died. The detectives found her story credible, but many of the potential charges related to these allegations were barred by the statute of limitations. The assault charges related to John Greer had expired due to the statute of limitations, so investigators focused on the cases of Adele Easterly and Jackie Greer. The Cold Case Unit gathered enough evidence to arrest Greer, and in April 2023, they traveled to Tennessee where he was living in a care facility in Kingsport. Despite being bedridden and unable to hold long conversations, Greer admitted during an interview that he had shot both Adele and his wife. Authorities looked into other suspicious deaths and assaults linked to Greer but could not find conclusive proof. Sheriff Bill Prummel stated clearly that Greer's actions did not reflect the integrity of the many dedicated men and women in the department over its long history. It was determined that Greer was not well enough to stand trial, and he passed away at the care center in Tennessee on March 2, 2024, at the age of 77. In January 2025, after 45 years, the sheriff's office officially closed the case. Meanwhile, in Chicago, it took 16 years to arrest the suspect in the 1999 murder of Marjorie Collette and another 10 years before his sentencing. On May 21, 1999, 65-year-old Marjorie was found dead in her bed by her niece in the Edison Park neighborhood. Jerome Lawrence and another man had been remodeling her house shortly before her death, making them suspects. Lawrence's criminal history complicated the case. After stealing his wife's car, he was arrested in Arkansas on unrelated charges. While in jail, he escaped by crawling through the ceiling, becoming one of the first to escape the then-new facility. Lawrence had a history of domestic violence, including an arrest for beating Willie Britton's mother. Willie recalled that Lawrence planned the home invasion, viewing it as a chance to support himself. He believed Marjorie, a retired Walgreens employee, was wealthy. Lawrence smothered Marjorie with a pillow, killed her dog to keep it quiet, and stole electronics and a safe from her home. Lawrence had multiple arrests in Florida under an alias, but was never linked by Florida authorities to the Chicago murder. In 2015, Willie spotted Lawrence on a Chicago street after 16 years and immediately called the police. Despite presenting a fake ID, the police arrested Lawrence after confirming his identity with fingerprints. During his court hearing, Lawrence stared at the gallery where Marjorie's niece, Judy Bees, sat. Judy expressed relief that justice was finally served, sharing fears that Lawrence had threatened their family after his escape. The Florida Department of Corrections and FBI had not connected Lawrence's Illinois warrants with his Florida arrests until later. Prosecutors highlighted Lawrence's criminal record, which included felony charges such as burglary, robbery, fleeing and eluding, and arson. On February 4, 2025, Lawrence, now 55, was sentenced to 17 years and required to serve 85% of his term, receiving credit for the time already served. In 2013, 86-year-old Una Crown was tragically found dead in her home in Wisbech, England. Her niece's husband, John, came to pick her up for Sunday lunch but found the curtains drawn and went to a neighbor for a spare key. Inside, he discovered Una lying face down in a pool of blood, with a strong burning smell in the air. Emergency services were called, but police mistakenly concluded that Una had accidentally set herself on fire, and that her neck injuries were caused by a tight scarf during a fall. As a result, her home was not treated as a crime scene, a critical error that delayed justice. Una lived alone in the bungalow she once shared with her late husband Ron, her niece. Judy fondly remembered her as a kind and straightforward woman who would never hurt anyone. Simon Gladhill, who was an acting sergeant at Cambridge Police at the time, later admitted the investigation mishandled the scene. Police, firefighters, paramedics, and undertakers had all disturbed the house and even touched Una's body, transferring blood to places like a light switch. It was a firefighter, not the police, who first raised concerns and urged that the scene be secured. A post-mortem 2 days later finally classified Una's death as suspicious. When John Bolton purchased the bungalow after Una's death, he noticed blood splatters and handprints on the walls and carpet, further casting doubt on the accidental death theory. A professional standards review found that initial officers breached professional conduct standards, though their actions were not considered deliberate neglect. Despite several arrests, no one was charged, and the case remained unsolved for years, leaving Una's family fearing justice might never come. In 2023, Detective Superintendent Ian Moore took over, acknowledged past mistakes, and apologized to the family. Breakthrough came with advancements in DNA technology applied to bloodied fingernail clippings, taken from Una's body years earlier. DNA matched David Newton, a former kitchen installer who had done odd jobs for Una. His DNA beneath her nails contradicted his claims that he hadn't seen her near her death and placed him at the crime scene. Newton had a disturbing history, including an incident in 2000 where he scared a relative of Una by lingering in her bedroom uninvited and declaring his love while likely intoxicated. Una's neighbor Paula Birch also recalled Newton's unwelcome visits. Newton was arrested in April and went on trial in January 2025, 12 years after the crime. His defense suggested other suspects might be involved, but prosecutors maintained no evidence of robbery at the time of death, saying money was taken afterward. The trial heard that Newton spent cash taken from Una's purse at a local club the day after her death. After about 29 hours of jury deliberation, longer than the trial itself, Newton was found guilty of murdering Una. Detective Superintendent Moore expressed hope that the verdict would bring closure to Una's family after years of pain. On February 14, 2025, Justice Neil Garnham sentenced Newton to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years, describing the attack as ferocious and sustained on a defenseless elderly woman in her own home. Newton showed little reaction before being led away. Detective Sergeant Dan Harper, speaking for Una's family, recalled how the brutal assault shattered their world. The family thanked everyone involved in achieving justice, noting that since Una's death, 3 close relatives had passed away without knowing the perpetrator. Now, with justice served, they can begin to heal and move forward. A mother had been hiding a dark secret for over 20 years. In March 1998, a man walking his dog in the Caylans area of Warrington, England, found something wrapped in 2 knotted bin bags. Inside was the body of a newborn baby boy, with no immediate clues about where he had come from. Locals named him Callum, after the area where he was found. Tests soon revealed that tissue paper had been shoved into the baby's mouth and throat, confirming his death was no accident. Forensic experts found the mother's blood on the bin bags and extracted a complete DNA profile. Authorities then compiled a list of teenage girls absent from 3 local schools around the time Callum died, to test their DNA. Several young women were arrested after family members suggested they might be involved, but the investigation stalled and went cold. About 20 miles away in Crocs, Liverpool, Callum's mother had kept her secret hidden, not telling even her husband that she had been pregnant or about the baby's death. The father remained unaware for 25 years that he had a second child. Years later, their older son, born in 1996, inadvertently triggered the breakthrough in Callum's case. In 2016, a first review of the national DNA database generated hundreds of potential matches. Attempts to narrow down suspects followed, but progress was slow. When Detective Inspector Hannah Friend took over in 2021, the team became hopeful after a name caught their attention: someone living near where Callum was found. This person had been interviewed during the original investigation but never properly recorded or questioned. Detective Hannah said, "We thought maybe this was someone who slipped through the net. It wasn't at all. We were so disappointed because we thought we'd solved it." After 2 years of eliminating suspects from the old list, she ordered a fresh search of the national DNA database in 2023. This produced roughly 500 new names, like finding a needle in a haystack, but this time it led to Matthew Shy. Initially, Matthew was just one of several interesting DNA matches sent for detailed analysis. A few months before Callum's mother was arrested, Detective Hannah received an email from a scientist with the subject line, "Are you sitting down?" The email confirmed that Matthew was a direct relative of baby Callum, with odds of 1 in 36 billion against being unrelated. Detective Friend said, "We identified a woman we believe to be Callum's mother, Joanne Shy." The team proceeded carefully, knowing the next step would be devastating. Detective Friend explained, "I didn't want to walk through that door and destroy lives." On July 28, 2023, police entered Joanne's home. She was sitting on a couch in pink pajamas that said "Mom." Listening quietly to the arresting officer with wide eyes and gesturing toward her stunned husband Neil, Joanne told the officer he doesn't know anything about this. With no evidence yet of how Callum died or who was responsible, both parents were arrested. Later recordings from the police car revealed Joanne telling Neil, "I'm not going to deny anything. It is what it is. I did it." During lengthy interviews, Joanne described how she had become pregnant again in summer 1998, struggling with severe but undiagnosed postnatal depression after their first son Matthew's birth. She told police her reaction was, "I cannot do this again." Joanne said she was terrified whenever news about baby Callum appeared, feeling haunted by the secret. Early in the pregnancy, she was unsure she was expecting, but after 5 months, she knew. Neil's long hours meant they were strangers in the night, and she hit her bump with loose clothes. In court, Joanne's barrister read a statement from Neil, who admitted he was not a great husband or father, and blamed himself. Joanne's memory about Callum's birth was fragmented, but she recalled that Neil and Matthew were out of the house at the time. She could not remember exactly what she did to end Callum's life, only that she felt she had to make him quiet. Medical reports suggested Callum had been mechanically asphyxiated. Joanne said she drove aimlessly until reaching a spot near Gulliver's World theme park, where she left Callum's body. A retired man walking nearby spotted a woman emerging from the woods looking upset. A longtime neighbor expressed shock at the news. She said, "When I heard her name, I thought, that's not the woman we've lived next to all these years." Another neighbor recalled that when police first came to the family's tidy semi-detached home, she thought someone staying there temporarily was in trouble. It made no sense to imagine that someone so kind and normal was involved. Council worker Joanne Shy may have committed a crime, but the truth was that detectives had finally solved a cold case that had remained unsolved in the records of Cheshire Police for 25 years. From this point, difficult legal and medical questions arose. Was Joanne capable of making a rational judgment when she ended Callum's life? And was she guilty of murder or manslaughter? Psychiatric evaluations commissioned by both the defense and prosecution all pointed in the same direction. Joanne's mental illness provided her with a partial defense. Detective Friend said, "My responsibility as an investigator is to follow the evidence and develop it so we can seek the truth." She added, "Personally, you wonder how anyone could do this to such a beautiful, precious child who deserved to live. But on the other hand, I think how awful it must be to feel that this was the only option you had." Joanne's fate was decided on April 4, 2025. At Liverpool Crown Court by Judge Mrs. Justice Iddy, she concluded that Joanne's postnatal depression had severely impaired her judgment, so the case called for compassion rather than punishment. Joanne received a 2-year prison sentence suspended for 2 years, alongside a requirement for mental health treatment for Detective Inspector Friend and her team. The promise they made at Callum's graveside in 2021 had been fulfilled. She said, "Once sentencing is complete, we will return to his grave to lay flowers and pay our respects. I hope he can rest in peace." For Joanne, the past 25 years had been spent, in her own words, waiting for that knock on the door. 17 years after a woman's legs were found in a San Diego dumpster, her remains were finally identified, and the suspect was discovered close to home. On October 5, 2003, legs were found in a dumpster at an apartment complex on Hilton Head Court in Rancho San Diego, California. Following a 911 call by a worker, police searched the complex for more body parts but found none, though they established that the remains belonged to an adult female. Her identity and the circumstances of her death remained a mystery for nearly 2 decades. In June 2020, cold case investigators used genetic genealogy techniques to reopen the case. The San Diego County Sheriff's Department explained. The goal was to find relatives whose DNA matched that of the unidentified victim. Once a DNA profile was created, it was uploaded to commercial genealogy sites that cooperate with law enforcement. By late 2020, the remains were identified as those of Lori Potter. Soon after, detectives began investigating her life leading up to her death. Sheriff Lieutenant Thomas Siver said, "Once we identified Lori, we reviewed her life to find out who she was, where she lived, and who her friends and family were." Investigators found strong and conclusive evidence that Lori's husband, Jack Potter, was responsible for her death, but did not disclose details. In 2003, the couple lived in Temecula, California. Lori was 54 years old and was never reported missing because only her husband knew she was gone. Her friends and family had not heard from her for years but were shocked to learn she had been killed. Jack was arrested on May 12, 2021, at his Rancho Cucamonga apartment and was held without bail at San Diego Central Jail. Lead investigator Troy Dahl said Lori's family was relieved to have her identified, having thought she was living elsewhere. He added, "Nobody knew what had happened. So this is bittersweet, the grief of her death mixed with relief at finding and arresting the suspect." Authorities believe Lori was killed shortly before her remains were found, either the day before or the day of discovery, but the cause of death was not specified. In February 2025, 72-year-old Jack Potter pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. and on May 2, 2025, he was sentenced to 15 years to life in state prison. An Albuquerque man was found guilty on all charges related to an assault that took place more than 30 years ago. On November 26, 1994, a 43-year-old woman named Susan was attacked while running near the Rio Grande Nature Center State Park in New Mexico. Despite extensive investigations, the perpetrator was never found and the case went cold. Susan passed away in 2013, and her assault kit remained untested until 2020, 2 years later. In 2022, DNA evidence matched Gilbert Contreras from Albuquerque, who was taken into custody on November 25, 2024. During the trial, the jury found guilty of 2 counts of criminal penetration and kidnapping. Prosecutor Jack Bennett described the brutal nature of the crime. He beat her, kicked her, forced her to a secluded area by the river and the bushes, and violently assaulted her. He added, naked, bound, and still gagged. She played lifeless, trying to seem unconscious until she could slowly work her way back toward the trail. The victim had been beaten with a rock wrapped in strips of her own clothing and assaulted twice. The court also heard a statement from the woman who found Susan that day in 1994. Describing her injuries, her face was swollen to twice its normal size. Her eyes were like little slits. She had big bruises and blood coming down her mouth. Susan's daughter testified that her mother passed away without ever seeing justice. In closing arguments, both sides debated the credibility of the DNA evidence. Defense attorney Adam Ducky argued there had been no due diligence in the investigation, both in 1994 and recently, citing lab issues that were allegedly overlooked. The prosecution countered that there were no problems with the evidence or the lab processing it. The defense also suggested the possibility of a consensual relationship between Susan and Contreras, which the prosecution dismissed, stating it was not mentioned in opening statements and lacked any evidence. The state sought the maximum sentence of 72 years, citing the crime's violence and Contreras' criminal history, while the defense requested 15 to 20 years given his age, nearly 60. Ultimately, on March 6, 2025, Judge Courtney Weeks sentenced Gilbert Contreras to 54 years in prison, likely meaning he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. The judge stated, "There is a long felony history and a history of violent crime with Mr. Contreras. This is an extremely violent and heinous case." In another case, Nancy Doherty, responsible for the brutal slaying of a Minnesota woman in 1986, was convicted and sentenced, but her conviction was later overturned and she had to be proven guilty again. On July 16, 1986, 38-year-old Nancy Doherty was found dead in her Chisholm, Minnesota home during a welfare check. Police determined she had been beaten, indecently assaulted, and strangled. Witnesses reported hearing a woman scream in the early morning hours. Scientists from the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension (BCA) obtained a full male DNA profile from evidence at the scene, but at that time, no matches were found in the criminal DNA database and the case went cold. Over the years, investigators interviewed and collected DNA from over 100 people. In 2020, 34 years after the crime, authorities obtained a DNA sample from Michael Allen Carbo Jr. of Chisholm with his consent. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension confirmed that Carbo's DNA matched the male DNA found on the victim and at the 1986 crime scene. Carbo was arrested in July 2022 and found guilty of first-degree murder while committing criminal conduct for ending Nancy's life. He was sentenced to life in prison. However, in May 2024, the Minnesota Supreme Court reversed Carbo's conviction, ruling that the judge in the 2022 trial had unjustly denied the defense's attempt to submit evidence regarding a possible alternative suspect. Carbo's second trial began on January 13, 2025. County Attorney Kim Mackey said, "Our thoughts go out to the family of Nancy Doherty. This has been a long road to justice. The family of Miss Nancy has shown the utmost strength and we thank them for their support from beginning to end." In January 2025, a jury again found the 56-year-old guilty. His original sentencing was scheduled for March 4th, but shortly before that date, his defense team requested an acquittal and hoped for a third trial, maintaining Carbo's innocence and claiming another person was responsible. Prosecutors argued the DNA evidence linked Carbo to the crime. The case will now return to district court. The St. Louis County Attorney's Office expressed disappointment but remains committed to prosecuting Carbo. In the United Kingdom, a cold case involving a woman missing for 52 years was solved. Sheila Fox disappeared from Coventry, England, just days after her 16th birthday in March 1972. Rumors suggested she had run off with an older man whose identity remained unknown. At the time, police had only a grainy black and white photo of her to aid the search. Sheila was born on February 26, 1956, to Irish parents Anne and Chris Fox, who had moved to Coventry after World War II. She was the first child born in England, with her older siblings born in Ireland. Sheila led a conventional childhood and planned to leave school at 16, which was typical then. However, instead of leaving school in July 1972, she disappeared suddenly in March, marking the start of her long missing person case. Family law suggested Sheila was involved with an older man, An insurance agent nicknamed the man from the PW, which was a popular slogan for an insurance company at the time. Sheila's worried parents reported her missing and distributed her only photo, hoping she had moved elsewhere. Despite numerous appeals, no clues surfaced for decades. In 2024, a fresh police appeal featuring the same grainy photo triggered public responses that helped locate Sheila. Detective Sergeant Jenna Shaw said, "Every missing person has a story, and their families and friends deserve to know what happened to them and hopefully be reunited with them." 16 months after disappearing, Sheila gave birth to a son, Robert, in July 1973. His birth certificate named John Foster, a barman from Enfield, North London, as his father. By then, Sheila had changed her surname to Foster, implying that married Sheila remained estranged from her family for years but reconnected with them in the 1980s. By then, her family had moved to Canada, having emigrated to Delta, British Columbia in 1976 to start a new life, perhaps partly to put the trauma of Sheila's disappearance behind them. The precise details of her attempts to reconnect with her family remain unclear, but it is believed that word eventually reached the Fox family in Canada, and the family accepted that Sheila was no longer missing. However, apparently no one informed the West Midlands police that contact had been re-established. Cousin Kevin Fox recalls, "We all thought her parents would have informed the police that she had been found, but who knows, maybe they did, and the message got lost in the records." It is also unclear what happened to Sheila's relationship with John Foster, the father of her son Robert. By 1983, Sheila had married Jack Thorpe, a divorced father of two who was 7 years her senior. Sheila and Robert took Jack's surname. Jack was a chauffeur from northwest London, and the couple lived in that area. By 2003, they were residing in a flat near London's North Circular Road in Cricklewood. In 2015, Sheila and Jack purchased a flat in Watford, Hertfordshire, where they still live. Robert, now 51 and also married, lives nearby and works as a lorry driver. Sheila was located at their flat near Watford town centre in January 2025. When asked about her sudden public attention following the police's discovery, Sheila declined to comment extensively, saying only, "It all happened a long time ago. I have moved on. It is all in the past. It has been a misunderstanding and I do not want to say any more." Sheila's mother Anne passed away in Delta, British Columbia, in August 1996, and her father Chris died in 2019 at age 98. In 2018, when her brother Christopher passed away at 71, Sheila showed that she was no longer estranged from the family by posting a loving tribute on Facebook. "Remembered with love, sleep well." A month later, on Christopher's birthday, she posted on legacy.com, "No card today, no cake, heavy hearts and tears. Blessed to have had you as my brother, Sheila X." Her surviving siblings continue to live in British Columbia. Finding Sheila brought closure to a 52-year mystery and ended one of the oldest missing person cold cases in the UK. Thomas David Cox, Arizona cold case solved after 30 years. Thomas David Cox was caught more than 30 years after committing two violent crimes. In Mesa, Arizona, on October 16, 1989, police conducted a welfare check on 22-year-old Susan Amy Morse, who had not shown up for work. They found her unresponsive in her apartment, beaten and strangled with an electrical cord. She had also been indecently assaulted. The autopsy confirmed asphyxiation as the cause of death. There were no signs of forced entry, leading detectives to speculate that Susan might have opened the door to someone she knew, just over a year later. On November 23, 1990, another 23-year-old single mother was also indecently assaulted in the same apartment complex. Unlike Susan, she survived the attack. The assailant also stole cash, and a VCR DNA evidence from both scenes matched, linking the crimes. However, when compared to convicted offender databases, no matches were found, and the cases went cold. In 2024, the break came when Cox was arrested on a misdemeanor charge in Colorado Springs. His DNA was tested as part of the cold case investigation, funded by the Saki Project, and matched the evidence from both crimes. Additionally, Cox's palm print matched a print found in the second victim's apartment. Sergeant Chuck Trapani said, "When there is new technology or new techniques on how to identify a suspect or examine evidence, we buy into that and re-examine the evidence as years go on. And in this particular case, it worked out dramatically." Susan Morse had no known living family, but the second victim was still alive and reportedly very grateful that justice was served. Cox was extradited to Arizona and pleaded guilty on February 2, 2024, to one count of first-degree premeditated murder and one count of aggravated assault. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a possibility of parole after 25 years. County Attorney Rachel Mitchell remarked, "One of the most agonizing aspects of cold cases is the long uncertainty endured by victims and their families. This defendant committed these offenses in such a cruel manner and then went on to have a full life while the victim's young life was halted. It is only appropriate that this defendant spend the rest of his life in prison." Tony Lee Wagner, cold case assault, arrested after 30 years in Missouri. Advances in forensic technology. helped solve a nearly 33-year-old cold case involving two Texas women hiking in Henning State Conservation Area, Tenney County, Missouri. On August 15, 1992, the women were approached by a man asking about a lost wallet. Shortly after, he attacked them with a rock. One victim was incapacitated and forcibly assaulted, while the other pretended to be dead and escaped to summon help. The injured woman was in a coma for several months. The Missouri State Highway Patrol and Tenney County Sheriff's Department launched a joint investigation. The victims appeared on America's Most Wanted in hopes of identifying the assailant, but no suspect was found. DNA evidence collected in 2008 created a suspect profile, but no match was identified then. The case remained unsolved until 2022, when forensic technology advancements led to identifying Tony Lee Wagner. DNA samples were collected and tested with Parabon Nanolab Services, confirming a match. Wagner was arrested by Fort Scott Police. Sergeant Mike McClure said, "It was difficult to determine based on only descriptive evidence from years ago, but technology and persistence helped us bring this case to a close." The investigation continues, with the prosecuting attorney's office preparing charges against Wagner. Tony Lee Wagner convicted for cold case assaults. The attorney's office charged Tony Lee Wagner with 2 counts of first-degree assault, kidnapping, and forcible assault. Court documents show the trial was moved from Tenney County to Ozark County due to a change of venue. After several delays, the trial began on March 24, 2025, in Ozark County Circuit Court. Lasting for days, the jury delivered a guilty verdict and recommended a sentence of life without parole. At 63 years old, Wagner was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree assault causing serious physical injury to special victims and 1 count of forcible assault or attempted forcible assault with a weapon or physical injury. Formal sentencing is scheduled for July 11, 2025. Dwight Harris. Links to 2 Orlando assault cold cases through DNA. Investigators in Florida used DNA evidence to connect Dwight Arthur Harris, an Orlando resident, to at least 2 assault cases. From over 2 decades ago, on February 1, 2002, an Orange County woman was attacked while walking to a friend's nearby apartment. The suspect approached her from the side of a building, tackled her, and threatened to stab her if she screamed. Holding a knife, he forced her behind a garbage dumpster where he indecently assaulted her. He then moved her into a wooded area and assaulted her again. After she began crying, the suspect instructed her to cover her head with her pants and wait for him to leave before fleeing. The victim was unable to identify the attacker's face. Months later, on July 10th, another woman was attacked near her Orlando apartment at around 3:30 a.m. She noticed a man peeping around the corner, who then dragged her into nearby bushes. During the assault, the suspect covered her face with a blue towel and asked personal questions. He forced her to keep the towel over her face throughout the attack, then ordered her to lie face down before running away. She escaped to her apartment once he fled. Due to his habit of dragging victims into wooded areas, investigators nicknamed the offender the Woodline Predator. Both cases remained unsolved for nearly 20 years until DNA from the assault kits was processed using genetic genealogy. In 2020, investigative reporter Greg Fox prompted a renewed probe. The Orlando Police Department submitted the unknown DNA profiles to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's Genetic Genealogy Investigations Program. Partnering with Parabon Nanolabs, they identified 4 persons of interest. Further detective work by SVU Detective Graham Cage narrowed the suspect list to 2 and ultimately to Dwight Arthur Harris. Authorities suspect Harris may be linked to other cases in the area and are currently testing DNA from an additional Orlando case that may be connected. The Orange County Sheriff's Office also noted a 2011 assault case where Harris was identified but the victim declined to pursue charges. On July 2, 2021, Harris, then 50 years old, was arrested at his Orlando home. Previously unknown to law enforcement, he was reportedly living a normal life with a family and working as a night delivery driver. Harris has lived in the Orlando area since the early 2000s. He was charged with 2 counts of battery with a deadly weapon or physical force. Detective Cage reflected, "We thought these cases were cold forever and that they would never be solved. Today, justice is finally being served." Victim testimony and sentencing of Dwight Harris. Before Dwight Harris received his sentence, one of his victims gave a powerful testimony via video, describing the lasting impact of the assault on her life over the past 20 years. She said, "For 2 decades, I have been the one serving a sentence, not in a prison of bars, but a prison of memory, shame, nightmares, and endless echoes of your cruelty. You are a coward, not just because you hurt me, but because you have never had the strength to admit what you have done." Originally pleading not guilty, Harris later agreed to plead no contest to 1 charge in exchange for prosecutors dropping the remaining charges. Once facing a possible life sentence, Harris secured a 15-year prison sentence in Orange County Court on February 17, 2025, with credit for 3 years already served. Upon release, he will be subject to 5 years of supervised probation and must register as a sexual predator. The victim addressed the court, sharing the emotional toll of the attack, saying 20 years of fear, anger, and grief. Now 15 years of a prison sentence is a fraction of the time I have spent trying to live in the wreckage you left behind. Even now I know the difference between us. I did not choose what happened to me, you did. Now a mother of two, she affirmed her determination not to let Harris's actions define her. Judge Diego M. Magrical too commended her courage, stating, "I just want to tell you how lucky your family is to have somebody like you. You are incredibly strong and brave to come in here, even if it is by video, and share what you have been through for the last 2 decades. At 54 years old, Harris will remain incarcerated until at least 2036. Michael J. Williams, sentenced for 1993 cold case assault. Michael J. Williams, a resident of Saxman, Alaska, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison for an assault that had haunted the Ketchikan community for decades. In January 1993, a 14-year-old girl was walking across the baseball diamond at Dudley Field near Ketchikan High School on a rainy night when a man wearing green fishing-style rain gear and a black scarf with a pink or purple pattern covering his face suddenly appeared. The man grabbed her from behind, covered her mouth, and threatened to use a knife if she screamed or told anyone. He indecently assaulted her behind the baseball dugout before fleeing into the darkness. Though the girl did not see the attacker's face due to the scarf, police collected swabs and sent an assault kit for testing. Despite a thorough investigation, the case went cold. In 2004, the Alaska State Crime Laboratory developed a DNA profile from the male DNA collected during the victim's examination. The profile was uploaded to a national database but initially produced no matches. That changed in 2021 when DNA from an unrelated assault kit led to a potential match to Michael Williams. As part of a statewide project to test previously unsubmitted kits, the DNA from the 1993 case matched a known sample from Williams. At 54 years old, Williams was charged with 2 felony counts, indecent assault and indecent abuse of a minor. Trial proceedings began on January 9, 2024, in Ketchikan. The prosecutor told the jury the rarity of the DNA profile was greater than 1 in 330 billion. Forensic DNA analyst Cheryl Duda testified, "You could search the earth multiple times and not find a profile like it. The male DNA collected belongs to Michael Williams. It is proven by science he is not in the dark anymore." In contrast, defense attorney Leif Thompson sought to cast doubt on the DNA evidence during opening statements, saying there is no smoking gun in this case, no scarf with black and pink, no diary, no other evidence. This case rests entirely on science, and if anyone believes Mr. Williams did it, it is only because of a DNA report. He also raised concerns about DNA degradation and chain of custody issues over the 30 years. Defense challenges DNA evidence in Michael Williams' case. Defense attorney Leif Thompson challenged the prosecution's DNA evidence, arguing that the statistic cited 1 in 330 billion was misleading because it did not account for population subgroups more likely to share similar DNA markers. He also highlighted the scarcity of descriptive details about the assailant at the time of the crime, implying the evidence was circumstantial. Throughout the trial, Michael Williams remained expressionless at the defense table. He faced a potential 30-year sentence for first-degree indecent assault, with a second charge carrying up to 10 years. After a week-long trial, on January 16, 2024, the Ketchikan jury found 54-year-old Williams guilty. On February 24, 2025, Judge Daniel Doty sentenced Williams to 25 years in prison. Williams's attorney, Philip Paul Wittner, announced plans to file both merit and sentencing appeals, expressing confidence in a favorable outcome through reversal and remand. Deborah Attrop's cold case solved after decades. The cold case of Deborah Att, a woman found dead in the trunk of her own car, was finally solved thanks to DNA testing and determined detective work. On December 1, 1988, police responded to reports of a suspicious vehicle at a remote construction site in Beaverton, Oregon. The abandoned car, missing license plates, had frosted windows and an open driver's side window with keys inside. Inside the trunk, officers discovered Deborah's body. Her blue coat and black heels were covered in mud, and similar mud stains were found on the car's hood, steering wheel, gear shift, and front right tire. From early on, detectives focused on Deborah's husband, Robert Elmer Attrops, as the primary suspect. The couple had married the previous year but had been estranged for months before Deborah's disappearance. Friends and co-workers worried for her safety due to escalating physical abuse. Deborah had also begun a new relationship and confided fears that Robert might harm her. Deborah, 30, was planning to divorce Robert. She worked as a secretary and bookkeeper, and the couple had recently adopted an infant daughter. On November 29, 1988, Deborah left work for a 5:15 p.m. hair appointment in Tiger. She left the salon around 7 p.m. and planned to pick up a daughter from Robert's Sherwood home at 9:30 p.m. Robert reported Deborah missing shortly thereafter, claiming he made calls to friends, family, and 911 from his home phone. However, no call records existed, and investigators believed he was not home when he made those calls. His alibi was never fully confirmed. Over time, the case stalled with no significant new leads despite reviews and clearance of other potential suspects, including Deborah's new boyfriend. In 2020, the Washington County Sheriff's Office reopened the case, with cold case detective Kevin Winfield uncovering new witnesses and evidence. Additional forensic testing was conducted on Deborah's clothing and soil samples collected in 1988. The breakthrough came when Robert's DNA was found on the coat Deborah wore when she was killed. Furthermore, FBI lab analysis confirmed that mud on the victim's vehicle matched mud collected from Robert's property. Detective Winfield also discovered that Robert sold roofing materials at construction sites near the body's discovery location. Robert was interviewed by Detective Winfield in 2022, but his account contained significant inconsistencies compared to his 1988 statements. On March 23, 2023, Robert Atrops was indicted by a grand jury and arrested on second-degree murder charges. During his April 2025 trial, Robert's defense team argued that the Oregon lab's DNA analysis was flawed or misleading, citing the technology's complexity and reliance on expert interpretation far beyond a layperson's understanding. Robert Atrops' trial and verdict. During Robert Atrops' trial, the defense questioned the significance of finding a husband's DNA on his wife's coat, suggesting it was not unusual and arguing that law enforcement had failed to thoroughly investigate alternative suspects. They emphasized the complexity of DNA interpretation and cast doubt on the prosecution's claims. In response, Washington County prosecutors defended the integrity of the forensic analysis, pointing to the experience of the crime lab staff, who conducts thousands of DNA tests annually. They argued the evidence strongly supported their theory that Robert was responsible for Deborah's death. After a 3-week trial, the jury needed less than a day of deliberation to find 70-year-old Robert Atrops guilty of ending his wife's life in 1988. Judge Oscar Garcia heard arguments from both sides regarding parole eligibility. Sentencing proceedings are scheduled to resume in July. Identification of John Thyssen, the mystery man from Phoenix. A cold case of a mystery man found near a Phoenix sidewalk in 2004 made significant progress thanks to advances in genetic genealogy. On August 17, 2004, a man was found unconscious on the sidewalk at 3rd Avenue and Madison Street. He had no identification and was taken to St. Joseph's Hospital, where he later died from heat exposure. Despite fingerprinting and DNA sampling, Phoenix Police Department efforts to identify him yielded no results, and the case went cold. In September 2024, the Maricopa County Medical Examiner's Office enlisted the help of Ramapo College's Investigative Genetic Genealogy Center in New Jersey. The center collaborated with Genelog in Georgia, using genome sequencing to extract the man's DNA. Files were then shared with Parabon Nanolabs for further analysis. Undergraduate students at Ramapo College initially worked on the case but could not complete it before their semester ended. However, the Genealogy Center staff identified a pair of third cousins related to the man shortly into their winter break. They concluded the man's identity was John Thyssen. In March 2025, the Maricopa County Medical Examiner, alongside the Arizona Attorney General's Cold Case Unit, confirmed John Thyssen's identity. He had been reported missing from Toledo, Ohio, on September 1, 2004. John suffered from mental health issues and had told his sister he planned to jump into the Ohio River. He was never heard from again. Kristen Edgars, senior medical legal investigator, praised Ramapo College for its dedication, saying, "Their tireless efforts have provided answers to countless families and demonstrate an unyielding dedication to the welfare of all people regardless of their circumstances." Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays expressed pride in the Cold Case Unit's work, highlighting the hope technology and cooperation bring to families seeking closure. Nancy Noga case. Justice. After more than a decade after evading justice for over a decade, an Ocean County man has finally been convicted for kidnapping, assaulting, and killing 17-year-old Nancy Noga. Nancy was a high school student at Civil War Memorial High School in New Jersey and worked part-time at a nearby shop. On January 7, 1999, she left her job around 6 p.m. for the usual 15-minute walk home but never arrived. Her disappearance triggered a massive search involving police, helicopters, and media attention. 5 days later, on January 12, at approximately 8:57 a.m., a man walking his dog discovered Nancy's frozen body in a wooded area behind a strip mall on Ernston Road, near her home. Nancy was found fully clothed, wearing a purple Arizona jacket, jeans and a sweater. An autopsy revealed she died from blunt force trauma to the head caused by a tree limb and had been indecently assaulted. Detectives believed Nancy might have known her attacker, as she was cautious by nature and unlikely to have gone with a stranger. Investigation into Nancy's case had been ongoing, with initial leads failing to identify a suspect. A sketch of a person seen near the crime scene at the time did not lead to any solid leads, and the case went cold for over 2 decades. Then, in 2021, a DNA sample from Bruce A. Szymanski of Barnegat and formerly South Amboy in Old Bridge, New Jersey was matched to the male DNA found on Nancy. Noga's body and underwear. At the time of Nancy's death in 1999, Szymanski was about 26 years old. His wife worked at a nearby Kmart close to where Nancy worked. In August 2021, Szymanski was arrested near his home and charged with kidnapping, aggravated indecent assault and murder. He also faced a weapons possession charge. Szymanski pleaded not guilty to all charges. His arrest resulted from an investigation that included genetic genealogy led by Parabon, Nanolab's chief genetic genealogist. Szymanski's trial began in October 2024 and lasted 3 weeks. He did not testify on his own behalf. During closing statements, his attorney Jason Seidman urged jurors to carefully consider the evidence. Seidman argued that there was no direct evidence of kidnapping or indecent assault and that the prosecution focused heavily on the DNA found on Nancy. He asserted, "The state believes whoever had intercourse with Nancy had to be the person who ended her life, and that is their theory from the start." Seidman also highlighted that many individuals were not considered suspects simply because their DNA was not found. He pointed out testimony suggesting Nancy was likely struck once from the front by a left-handed attacker, while Szymanski is right-handed. He asked jurors to find Szymanski not guilty if they harbored reasonable doubt. However, Middlesex County Assistant Prosecutor Katie Mae McGee disagreed strongly. She stated that on January 7, 1999, Szymanski kidnapped, assaulted, and killed Nancy. She described how Nancy's bruised and broken body was discarded in a cold, dark wooded area away from her usual route home, indicating the perpetrator was trying to avoid being seen. McGee told jurors no one would choose to go into those woods unless running away from something. She emphasized the critical role of the DNA evidence. The source of the male DNA is the identity of the perpetrator. We know the DNA was inside her when her life was ended. There is also male DNA on her underwear's left side, matching where her body was found. McGee argued that Szymanski had access to Nancy as she walked past the Kmart where his wife worked, making it a crime of opportunity. "The physical evidence does not lie," she said. "If you are firmly convinced that Bruce Szymanski is the offender, you must find him guilty." In October 2024, Szymanski was found guilty on all charges: first-degree kidnapping, aggravated assault, murder, and possession of a weapon for unlawful purposes. Seidman expressed disappointment and announced plans for appeals, maintaining Szymanski's innocence. During the trial, a friend recalled how Nancy's death had instilled fear in their community, saying they no longer walked alone or at night. After hearing the news, on March 17, 2025, 52-year-old Szymanski was sentenced by Superior Court Judge Joseph Pion to life imprisonment with a 30-year parole ineligibility period. He was also sentenced to 20 years for kidnapping to be served consecutively, 15 years for aggravated assault, and additional consecutive sentences for weapons possession. SAMAN Sky posted a 4-page letter on Facebook denying the charges, stating, "I did not kidnap, indecently assault, or slay Nancy Noga." He claimed he rejected a 10-year plea deal because he was innocent. He alleged the Department of Justice violated guidelines obtaining his DNA and argued that DNA alone does not prove guilt or kidnapping. He urged Nancy's family to review all discovery, asserting there were no signs of kidnapping or indecent assault on that day, and suggested Nancy's family deserves true justice and closure without innocent people being punished. Phyllis Baylor, cold case solved after 50 years. Phyllis Baylor, a mother traveling with her 3-year-old daughter to visit family in Bluffton, Indiana, was fatally harmed in 1972. Her daughter was found unharmed next to her in a ditch. This case remained unsolved for 5 decades. On July 7, 1972, 26-year-old Phyllis was driving from Indianapolis to Bluffton with her daughter when they never arrived. Her husband Richard received a call the next morning that Phyllis was missing. He found their abandoned car with its hood up on Interstate 69 in Grant County. Shortly afterward, a woman in nearby Allen County discovered Phyllis's daughter safe beside her mother's deceased body. Richard and Phyllis had been separated for about 3 months. Richard became a person of interest but was cleared after confirming his whereabouts during the incident. An autopsy revealed Phyllis had been fatally shot and indecently assaulted. Investigators developed a partial DNA profile from her clothing, but no suspect was identified, and the case grew cold. In 2024, Indiana State Police's cold case team re-examined the evidence with improved DNA testing. They developed a stronger DNA profile and collaborated with Identifiers International to find a suspect. On early 2025. The suspect was identified as Fred Allen Linman, who was 25 at the time of the crime and had no known connection to Phyllis. Linman had a criminal history, including a first-degree murder charge from 1985. Phyllis Baylor case solved after 53 years. Phyllis Baylor, a 26-year-old mother traveling with her 3-year-old daughter to Bluffton, Indiana, was fatally shot and indecently assaulted in 1972. Her daughter was found unharmed next to her. Despite an initial investigation, the case went cold. Suspect identified. Fred Allen Linman was matched to DNA evidence decades later in 2025. Linman had a criminal record, including a 1985 first-degree murder charge. Additional background: Lindemann was beaten with a baseball bat during a 1985 altercation in Detroit and left in a dumpster that was set on fire. He died before facing charges for Baylor's murder. Family reaction: Richard Baylor, Phyllis's estranged husband, expressed mixed feelings, relief at finally knowing who was responsible, but sadness that Lindemann had died. He hoped Phyllis's family could find closure and was glad their daughter finally got answers. Law enforcement statement: Sergeant Wes Rolander praised the closure the case brought to the family. Tony G. Leslie, cold case. Burglary and indecent assault. On December 25, 1993, a burglary and indecent assault occurred in Charlotte, and the case went cold until 2022 when new DNA technology linked Leslie to a partial male DNA profile found on the evidence. Leslie, already serving a 13-year sentence for unrelated burglaries and assaults, was indicted in March 2025 for first-degree indecent assault and burglary. Leslie pled guilty and received an additional 14-year sentence, to be served consecutively after his current imprisonment. The victim has been notified of this development. Edward Donald Raymond, identified after 40-plus years in July 1981. A black man's body was found floating in a rural area near Stockton, California. The body was badly decomposed, but a tattoo reading "Black is Beautiful" helped in late identification. Identified in 2025 using advanced fingerprint technology. The man was Edward Donald Raymond, born 1947. He had suffered a gunshot wound prior to death. No official missing person report was filed on him. Investigators are seeking any information from the public to help solve the case. Richard Martin, beaten to death. Cold case solved after nearly 30 years. Richard Martin was last seen alive in September 1995 in South Carolina. He was found beaten to death with a blackjack weapon. Witnesses reported jealousy involving a man named Bobby Milan, who was last seen with Richard. Milan failed polygraph tests, admitted details only the perpetrator would know, and was identified by investigators as the likely killer. Milan died in 2010 of cancer.